Hi, my name is Benjamin Aronson, and this is my video project. Today, I'm going to cook a steak and explain the chemical principles associated with the process. First, let me introduce you to what a steak actually is. Steak is a collection of muscle fibers, which are largely made up of proteins. These proteins hold within them a large amount of water. This water is a large contributor to the juiciness quality of a correctly cooked steak. During cooking, the applied heat causes proteins to vibrate because the molecules that they are made of move at faster at higher temperatures. This destroys the weak bonds holding the proteins in their complex shapes, while stronger peptide bonds remain intact. The unraveled protein strands then stick together due to the hydrophobic effect, forming aggregates. These aggregates exclude water. If too much water is excluded during cooking, then the product will be dry and tough. Just to give you a general overview of the process, here are the major steps I will be doing. 1. Salt the steak and dry brine for 1 to 48 hours. 2. Preheat the oven to 250. 3. Cook the steak until the internal temperature reaches 127 degrees Fahrenheit. 4. Preheat a cast iron skillet until smoking. Sear the steak, adding butter and aromatics for flavor, not for chemical reasons. Take out of the pan and enjoy. Salting the steak and dry brining. You may or may not know this, but salting a steak does more than just enhancing the flavors of the meat, as it also helps in the overall experience. First, salt draws the moisture out of the steak initially due to the difference in osmolarity, as the salt concentration is greater outside the steak than inside. On a molecular level, the water moves to the outside of the steak in an attempt to reduce the concentration outside of the meat, trying to achieve equilibrium. More importantly, if enough time is given, hence the minimum 1 hour, the salt is drawn back into the cells via diffusion. As it diffuses in, the water that was drawn out is also drawn back into the meat, so there is no significant water loss. Once inside, the salt also disrupts the contraction of proteins during cooking, preventing them from excluding as much water when they form aggregates as discussed earlier. Further, the water is experiencing strong intermolecular interactions with the salt, so it becomes less thermodynamically favorable for it to leave the system. Furthermore, the boiling point elevation caused by the salt as an impurity further lowers evaporation loss. Thus, the deeper the salt penetrates, the more juicy the final product is. Overall, the earlier you salt your steak, the better the salt will cause its effect, as it will have more time to evenly distribute throughout the meat. However, it is better to avoid going over 48 hours because this will dry out the steak too much if left uncovered. Preheat the oven to 250 degrees Fahrenheit. Today, I'm using a low temperature to do the majority of the cooking of this steak because the steak will come up to temperature more evenly, preventing the outside from overcooking before the inside is done. This method is called reverse searing, and it allows for a final product which is evenly cooked to an exact doneness that also has a great crust. If the outside is cooked at too high a temperature while the inside still needs more time, the outside will be gray and overcooked before the inside is done. If this happens, then your steak has a gray band around the edges when you cut into it, which you will not see in my steak later. Cook the steak until the internal temperature is about 127 degrees Fahrenheit. With this method, it's better to use a wire rack for better heat transfer. If the steak is cooked on a flat surface, juices pool up underneath, and evaporative cooling prevents the temperature from going high enough to evenly cook the steak. This is because water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the temperature that the bottom of the steak will remain, while the dry part of the steak cooks at an ambient 250 degrees Fahrenheit. I prefer the final product to be medium rare, so I finish up this cooking step when the meat is about 127 degrees Fahrenheit, but to each their own. Preheat a cast iron skillet until smoking, and then sear the steak. The butter, garlic, and rosemary are used for flavor purposes. Searing a steak is key to reaching its flavor potential. The chemical reaction that we associate with a brown crust resulting from searing is called the Maillard reaction. The Maillard reaction creates brown pigments in cooked meat in a very specific way. By rearranging the amino acids and certain simple sugars, which then form collections of rings with conjugated resonance systems that can absorb and emit light in such a way as to give the meat a brown color. These pigments are also delicious. Take out of the pan and enjoy. As discussed earlier, cooking the steak slowly allowed for a perfect edge-to-edge medium rare cook to be obtained. Using a very hot pan to sear also prevented the steak from having that gray band around the edge that I was talking about earlier. Notice how it's wall-to-wall medium rare. Also notice how juicy the steak is here. That is a result of the salting and the cooking techniques used. Finally, notice the brown crust created by the Maillard reaction. Now to try it. Delicious.